Hello there guys and welcome, it is Niran here, and today it is time for me to bring you yet another video here on FNG Racing. Today, with it being a week until the first race of the Formula 1 season, I'm going to be going through my predictions for the season overall, and this season is probably going to be one of the hardest seasons ever to predict, and that's probably going to be because of the massive scrap there's going to be in the midfield. I mean, basically from about 4th to 10th, really. You can't really, well, even from like 3rd to 10th, it's going to be extremely difficult to actually predict, but I've tried to give it a go, even though it's probably going to be as difficult as deciding which out of 11 potatoes is going to hit the floor first. I don't know what that is as an analogy, but whatever the circumstance, we're going to go through some of the predictions, mainly for the teams. I'll talk about drivers briefly, but it'll mainly be team order. Otherwise, we're going to be here till next Tuesday if I talk about the drivers in general. But obviously, first place is probably going to be one of the most easiest to predict as my Skype goes off. I think that even though Ferrari are slightly more confident that they're going to beat Mercedes this year, the reality is they're not going to. You look at Mercedes during testing; they did the whole season's worth of laps in 2 weeks of testing. That is a disgraceful amount of laps. That is absolutely just disgraceful. And they only encountered one problem, and I think that was on the final day of testing. That was a transmission issue. So, in terms of reliability, they seem to have it pretty much locked down. So the only way Ferrari are really going to be able to beat them is based on speed, and to be honest with you, I think Mercedes still have the pace advantage. It's perhaps slightly smaller now than it was last season and the season before, but I think Ferrari are still going to struggle to beat Mercedes overall. I think they'll beat them at certain tracks like Singapore, Hungary again, maybe even at Malaysia like Vettel, where Vettel won of course last season, and that got us all hyped, didn't it? It got us all hyped that Ferrari were going to give it a good bash, but in the end Mercedes ended up dominating. So I think Mercedes will end up winning the Constructors' Championship. That's pretty much a given. And in terms of the championship, you know, I really want Nico Rosberg to win. And I'm not going to lie to you, out of the Mercedes drivers, I prefer Vettel to win the championship because that'd be amazing, but I don't think it'll happen. And the Mercedes drivers, I would prefer Nico Rosberg to win. That's not because I don't like Lewis Hamilton. I do like Lewis Hamilton, he's British, but just so, I don't know. Otherwise, what can Nico Rosberg be apart from a second driver? You know, he's just going to be defined as the Mark Webber of Mercedes. He's never actually, you know, you're never going to look at him as a good driver. He's a good driver, but if he doesn't win a championship and he's always coming second to Lewis Hamilton, he's never going to be looked upon as a good driver. But anyway, so I think personally Lewis Hamilton will win the championship again, but I would like Nico Rosberg too. So I'm still quite undecided. As I alluded to slightly, I think earlier, I think Ferrari will probably be the closest challenger to Mercedes. I think they'll win a good 4, possibly 5 races this season, but that new Ferrari power unit doesn't overly seem too reliable. In terms of testing, Haas, Sauber, we're all having issues with it. The 2016 version, the 2015 version, the Toro Rosso are running, looked absolutely bulletproof, but I think Ferrari may struggle a little bit more than Mercedes do in terms of reliability, but overall they'll give it a good run, but they will, I think, come second in the championship. Now is where it gets tricky, because flipping every team could be completely interchangeable between 3rd and 10th. I personally think just Williams will come 3rd, and that's basically because of their driver lineup. I think Valtteri Bottas and Felipe Massa are stronger than the team, or the group of drivers that I think are going to come 4th, and that's Sergio Perez and Nico Hülkenberg, because I believe Force India will come 4th in the championship. They reckon they've made strides forward. They haven't really changed the car all that much from last year, but at the back end of last year, Force India were arguably on par with Williams. So if they've improved over the winter and Williams haven't improved all that much, Force India could give it a real go in terms of actually finishing 3rd in the Constructors' Championship. I think based on driver lineup, Bottas and Massa of Williams will just get the edge, but in terms of the actual Drivers' Championship, I think those guys will be sort of interlinked. Maybe a Williams driver, then a Force India driver, then a Williams driver, then a Force India driver, because I think it could be very, very close between those guys. After that, it's even more of a melee, because we've got Toro Rosso, Red Bull, McLaren and Renault, which is pretty much the next group of cars, in my opinion. Again, basically interchangeable, but I've actually gone with Toro Rosso for 5th. Because, in all honesty, I don't actually know. They're going to have more reliability than Red Bull, certainly than that Tag Hour or Tag Heuer power unit that is basically a Renault power unit. They're going to have more reliability, I would have thought, and they should still have more pace in a straight line than the Red Bull. Even though it's a 1-year-old power unit, they know what they're doing with it. Well, I say that loosely because obviously they didn't have the power unit last year, but there's miles on the clock for a 2015 Ferrari power unit. You know what you're going to get with it, as opposed to not knowing what you're going to get with a Tag Heuer power unit, which is what Red Bull have. So I think it could actually be a slightly more disappointing year for Red Bull than it was before. However, I still think it'll be pretty close between Williams, Force India, Toro Rosso and Red Bull. They're not going to be distinct groups that never sort of interchange. I think there'll still be some good racing between all 4 teams, but over the season, Williams, I think, will come third, then Force India, then Toro Rosso, beating the bigger brother car of Red Bull, which I'm not entirely sure has ever happened. Do correct me if I'm wrong in the comments section. Also, tell me what your predictions are for the season in the comment section as well. That be driver, whoever wins the Drivers' Championship, and also your prediction for the Constructors' Championship. If you want to give a full top 11, the whole 11 order, then that's absolutely fine. Or if you want to predict who's going to win or come last, that's absolutely fine as well. But I'd love to hear what you guys think about this. 7th place, they reckon they're flipping amazing now, but I still have my doubts. And this is McLaren Honda, I reckon, will come in 7th. Jenson Button, of course, and Fernando Alonso. I've just realised whilst I've been going through, I haven't particularly been talking about the driver lineup that much. But Toro Rosso, actually, I named the top 4, but Toro Rosso are Verstappen and Sainz still. Red Bull are still Ricciardo and Kvyat, and McLaren are still Alonso and Jenson Button. Out of the 2, I reckon just flip a coin. I don't know who's going to win out of those 2 in the championship, but I still don't think they're going to have a very good championship. At first, I think they'll still be fighting where they were at the end of last season, which is sort of about, 12th to 15th in every race. Knocking on the door of points, depending on the track and also depending on how many retirements have happened. Fairly frequently knocking on the door, but not necessarily frequently scoring, actually scoring points. Towards the end of the season, I think they will start to get it a little bit nailed and probably be the sort of the 5th best team on the grid. But obviously, half a season of being 5th best team on the grid is not enough to get you 5th in the championship. So I still think they'll come 7th. Obviously, a very experienced lineup of Jenson Button and Fernando Alonso. They are struggling again this year. They'll, to some extent, know how to change things. Both of them obviously had to deal with McLaren last year and have had to deal with bad teams in the past. Jenson Button had to deal with Benetton in 2001. Fernando Alonso's had time at Minardi in the same year. So both of them have experience at bad teams. Both of them have experience at McLaren, obviously. But 7th in the championship, although they'll be a bit more competitive, certainly, than they were last year. They seem to have got reliability even more nailed, or slightly more nailed, than they did last year. But still not entirely sure they'll get in the top half of the Constructors' Championship. After that, technically new team, which is Renault. I think they will find it quite difficult. They haven't got the most experienced driver lineup. They haven't got a very skillful driver lineup, though. But Kevin Magnussen and Jolyon Palmer potentially aren't going to know exactly how to cope if they are struggling at the start of the season, because they're not as experienced as, say, the McLaren drivers. But next season, I think 2017 could be a big year for Renault. I think they'll start to get back to where they were before, but as the first season goes, with the current regulations, they will find it difficult to come in and just be amazing. I know they've got a lot of Lotus workers, but they have a severely down on the rest of the field power unit. The Renault is still pretty poor, apart from, in comparison to the Honda. So they are going to struggle, but I think overall they'll get the hang of things towards the end of the season, a bit like McLaren, and end up coming 8th. I think in the end, Kevin Magnussen will fairly convincingly beat Jolyon Palmer, and that's not a dig at Jolyon Palmer, just because Magnussen's more experienced, in my opinion, a slightly better driver than Jolyon Palmer, who had to take quite a few digs to win the GP2 Championship, but of course is the GP2 champion of a few seasons ago. He's a proven good driver, but I think Kevin Magnussen will have the edge over him. 9th place, another new team in my opinion, Haas, with the Ferrari power unit. First test in Catalonia was very, very promising for them. As a new team, they came in very professional and pretty decent reliability overall. But in the second test, it was a slightly it was a bit more of a wake-up call. A lot more problems for their drivers, Romain Grosjean and Esteban Gutierrez. In my opinion, out of the two, Romain Grosjean will beat Esteban Gutierrez. Again, fairly comfortably, not absolutely hands down, domination. Because Gutierrez is, although thought of as not a very good driver, I think he's quite underrated. And is, a good driver. He's not going to set the world alight, but he's a good driver. And I think they'll come 9th in the championship because they are going to struggle at the start of the season. It's the same thing that we've talked about with McLaren and Renault. They're not going to get to grips with this new season instantly, in my opinion. Obviously, I'm probably going to get proved wrong, let's be honest. Whenever I predict anything, it ends up horribly wrong. But yeah, Haas will struggle, I think, at first because they're a new team. That's to be expected. But I think they'll become very competitive and actually start challenging for points, certainly in the second half of the season. 10th place, Sauber fans, you're not going to like me for this. I do know quite a few. Sauber in 10th. I still think they're going to beat Manor, but overall the car hasn't changed a huge amount, and they were pretty down there at the end of last season. They always struggle when it comes to finances in terms of actually developing the car, so naturally they're going to get worse as the season progresses. It happens every season with Sauber. It's the opposite for Force India, but it happens every time with Sauber. They start off fantastically. NASA came 6th in Australia, of course, last season in the first race, or 5th, I can't remember. But obviously, the teams around them know a lot more about the regulations for this season, so they're not going to get it given to them on a plate by people retiring constantly, like happened in 2015. They're going to have to work for it. The car probably isn't that fantastic anyway. They're going to get worse as the season progresses in comparison to everyone else whilst they start developing. And they only got one test in Catalonia with their new car. They had to do the first test with the 2015 spec car, which is obviously not too ideal. Obviously the same lineup as last year, as is the case with a lot of the drivers, NASA and Ericsson. Again, like Gutierrez, I feel as if Marcus Ericsson is a very underrated driver. I do think he's got some quality. But I think Felipe Nasr might just edge him. It won't be very dominant. It won't be like a domination. But I think Nasr might just edge him. And then finally, best livery of the season goes to Manor, but I think they'll still come 11th out of 11. By no means as badly as they did last year. Because last year they put that car together on a whim. And in fact, I don't even think it was a 2015 spec car. I swear they just ran the 2014 car again. They've obviously changed the car. They've got some development going. They seem to have some finances going as well. Obviously, they set up a World Endurance Championship team as well. And suddenly Manor Motorsport, or ex-Marussia, seem to be sort of flinging some dollars around. Or pounds, obviously, but, the metaphorical dollar. A good driver lineup. A lot of people were in outrage that Alex Rossi didn't get the actual driver spot instead of Haryanto. Rossi has, however, got a development sort of test driver role, but a lot of people were saying, it should be second driver. He's far better than Haryanto. In my opinion, he's actually not. I think Alex Rossi is actually fairly overrated. A lot of people, I think, just jump on the bandwagon of wanting him to be in F1 because he's come so close so many times. I do want him to get into F1, believe me, I do. But actually, I don't think he's that. I think he's better than Haryanto, but not as much as people were suggesting. Haryanto was pretty good last season. He completely outperformed Arthur Peak, who's another very good driver, in GP2, his teammate at Campos. And in the first half of the season, he was giving it some to Stoffel Van Dorn. If you're giving it some to Stoffel Van Dorn, you're a pretty good driver. Obviously, Alex Rossi managed to maintain that over the season, but Haryanto's not a bad driver. He had a bit of a few hiccups, it has to be said, in testing, and has certainly been outperformed by his teammate Pascal Wehrlein so far. I actually think Pascal Wehrlein can get a point this season. Come at me. I know you might not believe me, but I think Pascal Wehrlein can get a point for Manor, but I still think they'll come last in the drivers' standings. Nevertheless, that is pretty much the end even of my 2016 Formula 1 predictions video. Again, if you have any differing opinions, which I'm sure you will, then feel free to drop your predictions in the comment section. I would love to see them and hear them. If you did enjoy the video though, feel free to hit the likes button, subscribe if you're new around here as well. We're very close to 500 subscribers, and I'll be doing some Dirt Rally stuff when Dirt Rally comes out, continuing with MotoGP, Race Driver Grid, and of course some more F1 content. Sprint mode will be returning soon, don't worry, and obviously some more F1 content when F1 2016 comes out. Nevertheless, it has been a pleasure ranting at you guys today. Have a good day, enjoy yourselves, and goodbye.